Hi all, welcome to the Empowering Equine podcast, where we talk about all things related to science-based training and management, positive reinforcement, Lima-focused training, and equine welfare and ethics. I'm your host, Alta van Niekerk. I'm often joined by my moderator and husband, previously known as the fiancé. Hope you enjoy this podcast and find inspiration to become the best horse person you can be for your horse. Welcome back, everybody. The husband, how has it been going?
It has been going very busy. We are really jam-packed with work at the moment, but yeah, we're back.
We're back and making time for the podcast.
Yes, we have really put a lot of effort into this third script, so I hope you all enjoy this.
Yeah, we're trying to make it sound more chatty but have a better flow to it. So
Yes.
Today we're going to be talking about when can you stop using food in positive reinforcement training or horse training. I guess when you stop using a reward, it's no longer positive reinforcement training, then it's just training. And I mean, we'll get into all of that in a second. Recently, this topic popped up on TikTok, but has been a major talking point on social media as well for the longest amount of time. So when the topic of positive reinforcement training with horses comes up, somewhere in the comments section, someone will ask a question along the lines of, I don't want to feed my horse cookies forever, or I don't want to feed my horses 24/7, or so when can I stop using food then? And well, the short answer is never. That is, if you actually want to maintain the behavior.
Yes, I certainly don't want to give food up ever.
Yeah, so not everybody takes that statement as well as you do. The statement scares a lot of people away from training with food reinforcements. It seems so limiting and feels like you will never reach your goal and you have to reward every single thing for every single second. Positive reinforcement has a lot of nuances, much more than I think a lot of people realize. It's much more than add food and a bridge signal when a wanted behavior happens and it's successful and done skillfully. It's a process of learning the horse how to learn. It's how we start sessions. It's the pace of learning. It's the rate of reinforcement. It's how we handle unwanted behaviors. It's implementing the Humane Hierarchy.
But what do you mean by Humane Hierarchy? Can you please explain that?
Yeah, sure. The Humane Hierarchy, it's a model in which training methods are ranked from least invasive to most invasive. And it was developed by Dr. Susan Friedman. I'll add a link in the show notes below with a much better description of what it all completely entails, because that's actually a whole podcast episode on its own. So, looking at all of that, food is such a small, albeit a very critical part of the training process. But people can really get hung up on the feeding part and thinking we use sugary treats, while in reality, most trainers use mainly a simple hay pellet or chopped hay.
And I can confirm that I have traveled many kilometers over many roads to find my wife the perfect food reinforcement. So we have arrived at shops and then she asked for pellets. The kind lady brings us the pellets and then she will just say, no, this is too sugary, or this has too much this or too much that. She is really picky about her reinforcement.
Yeah, and I mean, we can actually do a whole podcast episode on that. How, starch and sugar isn't really good for horses and the impact it has on them. Getting back to...
Yes, that's a topic for a whole nother day and a whole nother episode.
Yes. So, if you go back if we go back to our learning history in a traditional horse world, because you and I come from, I've showed horses. The first time I went into the show ring, I was probably 3 years old, and showed up until I was 18. And you rode endurance horses. Is that okay for me to say on the air? Do you want to disclose that?
Yes, no, I don't mind. I started, technically, I started riding dressage, but there weren't many events in our area, and we had to travel like 600, 700 kilometers, which is 300, 400 miles to do an event. And there is probably people that do that, but we said that it's just too far.
Definitely not back then. There's more people now, I think, like in Bloemfontein or Kimberley, but definitely not back then. Yeah, we had to go to Johannesburg, or one of the capitals, for really to be a part of a show. And endurance riding was all around us. Within, I think our closest ride was 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers. And our furthest one that we did was about 400 kilometers. Yeah, so when did you start riding endurance? Sorry, I forgot. I think I was 14 or 15 years old. It was in the beginning of high school. Yeah, and you stopped riding around, competing, let's say. Yeah, I stopped competing when I started studying, because I wasn't at home every weekend to train. And I think I did like 2 or 3 rides in a year, and it wasn't enough to be competitive. I just did it for the fun. Then again, we had a trainer, and he's about 60% of my weight. And it isn't fair for the horse to train with a lightweight and then compete with a heavyweight. But that's kind of like, so you were 14, that's about 5 years of learning history you have in a traditional kind of horsey sphere, I would say. No, I'll say, because I'm 27 now, I would say then it's 13 years. Because just because I haven't ridden I have ridden in the past 7 years, I haven't consistently ridden. But once every 4 months or 6 months. But you have been exposed. I'm talking about, the mentality that comes with, being in a traditional horse world where it's more punishment / pressure aversive based, I would say I grew up in that kind of world since I was 3 years old. Maybe, my whole life basically a very traditional upbringing in the horse world. So that's almost 20 years, a little bit less than 20 years, 2 decades of habits and norms and, ways of doing things that I've practiced. If a horse walks away from you, you pop his head collar. That's something that I didn't consciously do. I didn't have to think, I have to pop him now. It was ingrained in your training. It was automatic, and I'm still struggling with these automatic responses. I would say I'm much better now, but I would definitely much prefer them to not ever occur and, the thoughts never occur again. But that's what I'm trying to explain with, that long learning history we have. Yeah, but if you say that the traditional mentality of training, I definitely had that traditional mentality, even if I didn't ride. It's only since we've been dating, and mainly since you've been doing the positive reinforcement, that our minds have changed together, I would say, because you would do the research, tell me about it, and then we would debate about the pros and the cons about it. And I have to admit, I purposefully played the devil's advocate to make sure that she is steadfast in her opinions, that she really knows what she's talking about. Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I think you might have thought I was a bit of a loon at some point.
Not at some point,
just
at multiple points.
But, just one morning you just rocked up and I was clicker training my cat in my apartment. I was like, what is going on here?
And the face that I was greeted with was of pure excitement. Like, look what she can do now.
Yeah, I mean, just a little tangent as well. The moment since you've just spoken about, how I felt like, look at what I'm doing now. My husband and my father-in-law and my brother-in-law had a horse that just did not want to trailer load. I mean, my husband himself can tell you, what his first loading experience was like.
Yes, we were a team of big, strong, muscly men, and we picked up his hind legs and just pushed him forward on his front legs until he was inside the box. That was how we loaded him.
Yeah, and I mean, he was just like nothing. He did not want to load, and not at all. And they tried, they trained him. They took, how long did your dad and them actually try to get that horse into a trailer?
Yes, for the record, we are not complete cowboys. We have friends that they will fetch the horse out of the veld, and Thursday he was a wild horse, never seen people before. Friday they put the saddle on his back, get him to stop bucking, and Saturday he does his first endurance ride. We are not like that. We usually try to get our horses to be as prepared as possible. We will usually train them about 3 months ahead of time. We will start teaching them to box.
Yeah, so you give the horses actually some sort of education, and you give them the correct time. And I would say you guys had, because most of the horses are sold now besides my two and yours, a very fantastic species appropriate lifestyle. I mean, I always say this is horse heaven. Like, honestly. So, I mean, that I would say also made the training process a bit easier, but this specific horse, he just did not want to load. And
not at all.
Yeah. And I mean, I was just dabbling in positive reinforcement clicker training, and I mean, I understood the basics, but I never had a horse really to work with aside from my childhood pony, which didn't have any quote unquote problems. And I just told my now dad-in-law, well, I've heard about this clicker training thing. I can try it, And he's just like, well, nothing else is working. So, you do your thing. And this is coming from someone that, I mean, it was almost the rule, no hand feeding horses. And it was about 3 days and he loaded just beautifully.
Yeah, within the first 45 minutes, he was loading himself in and out, but he was still hesitant and he wasn't consistent. And within 3 days, she got him in and out like a pro. Yeah,
and if you want to see the videos, it's on my Instagram feed a while back. The picture title is Hadi. And there's some videos and stuff. And obviously, I mean, I felt like I was the shit back then. But there are so many things I would do differently. That's definitely not a how-to video. But I mean, that moment was when I felt like I've never felt this comfortable / capable around horses.
Empowered.
I felt empowered. And I felt like, I've never felt so safe around horses. I've never felt this in control of horses. It really was just empowering. That's the best word I can say. I mean, it was amazing. I felt like I can do anything, and I still do.
So to sum it all up, we come from a traditional horse training methods, and we don't anymore.
Yeah, but, we're still carrying some sort of baggage because it has such a long learning history. I mean, me, 20 years, the husband, about 7 years? Bit longer?
Years.
13 years? Okay. That's a very, very, very long time compared to my, I would really say, deeply my last 3 years of really doing positive reinforcement Lima-based training. I mean, that's a lot of investment I have to do to relearn everything I've learned and have become an automatic response from the last 20 years. So training with food actually goes against everything we have learned in our years as quote unquote normal equestrians. Not everyone, but many still believe that hand feeding horses causes horses to bite and or be muggy, but in reality, the person actually unintentionally reinforced or trained that behavior, being biting and being muggy. I mean, I'm looking back at myself when I used to give my horse carrots. You know, I would be like, oh, he's so cute. He wants to get the carrot out of the bag. And then I would give him the carrot. Him nibbling on the bag of carrots reinforced that behavior when I actually give him the carrot. So, but now a horse can have a behavior that is, okay, this is how I look, quote unquote, to receive food. And that is often kind of like a calm default behavior. I also have a whole post about that on my Instagram, and I will also link that in the show notes.
I also had a horse, my first horse, that had biting problem. And now I also, even now in hindsight, they say hindsight is 20/20, but now in hindsight, I also realized it was my inconsistency of rewarding him with food.
And also just not realizing. You didn't realize that was reinforcing something else.
I've been riding horses about a month back then, so I wasn't a professional at all, but I inadvertently and in my ignorance learned my horse to bite me for cookies.
Yeah. So with these stigmas in mind, something that makes people even more hesitant about trying positive reinforcement training, I think, is that across the board, no matter the discipline or the industry, using food is the biggest no-no you can do. So hearing that we can't really stop using food just goes against our deeply ingrained learning history, even though we know it works and why it works based on scientific evidence, not just my own or others' experiences on how well it works when done well and skillfully. But as we build the behaviors, in approximation of course, it will be to a lesser extent, or rate of reinforcement is another way of looking at it. But this isn't a drawback that is only seen when using positive reinforcement training. All behavior is driven by some sort of motivation or consequence. Reinforcement, be it negative or positive, makes a behavior more likely to occur. For negative reinforcement, it is the absence of pressure or coercion when behavior is performed. For positive reinforcement, it is the addition of something appetitive or desirable when the desired behavior is performed. I would like to quote Adele Shaw. She's a certified horse behavior consultant by the IAABC from the Willing Equine. Even the most well-trained horses at the highest level are still doing what they do for one of those reasons. Otherwise, the horse would never have a reason to ever do anything we want. So, going back to the question of when can I stop or less frequently feed my horse, is when behaviors are more established or have a stronger learning history. We can start to reinforce it, in air quotes, less. With positive reinforcement, we click and reinforce for the quote-unquote full behavior and no longer all the approximations thereof. With negative reinforcement, we will only cue the behavior without adding pressure because the cue predicts that pressure might be added if the horse does not respond. I think a great example is looking at traditional Liberty horses. We think because there are no ropes or whips or barriers, the horse is doing it for us. Or at least that was what I used to feel about it when I scrolled on Instagram and saw all these magical Liberty horses. But it's still being reinforced with the perceived threat of if the horse doesn't do it, pressure will be applied. And when a horse suddenly stops performing a behavior, the behavior has gone through an extinction process. More on that in a bit.
So how can we build behaviors and maintain them with positive reinforcement without feeding for every single approximation?
Well, there are actually a few ways. We can establish the behavior, like a stand stay, for example. A stand stay would be the equivalent of ground tying. Once a stand stay has been trained, which means the horse is performing the behavior when cued and stands in the stay for the desired length of time, we are only clicking and rewarding for the stay and no longer every step we take away from the horse. So we would start training it by, we're cueing a stay and the horse stands and we take a half step back, click and feed. And we're asking again, maybe kind of a full step back, click and feed. We're no longer, like for every step we take, it has been established that we can go a certain distance for a certain amount of time and the behavior has been trained with all that criteria. We're simply just maintaining it.
So you've been telling me that unknowingly, this is how I've been training our dogs to get off of the back of the truck by only rewarding them when I say the cue, when in the beginning I had to reward for every step that I took back.
Yeah, and the positive, the appetitive you're adding is them being able to get off the truck. But more on alternative reinforcers in a second. I think that actually ties into our third point just in a second. Another way is we can create behavior chains where the sequence of behaviors are rewarded and not the individual behavior. For example, training the horse to be mounted from a mounting block. So if we actually break down that behavior, it's the horse approaching the mounting block. That's one behavior. Standing still at the mounting block for a period of time. That's another behavior. Standing at the mounting block in the correct position. There is criteria to add to standing at the mounting block. Standing still while actually being mounted is another element of that. We are marking and rewarding that sequence of behaviors instead of all those elements individually. It's another way we can maintain the behaviors. And of course, we need to train these behaviors beforehand and ensure it's reliable and on cue and on stimulus control.
So you would first train every behavior individually and then put them together?
Yeah, I would do that, but obviously not everything all at once. I would add criteria. Okay, I want you to approach the mounting block and then stand still for 2 seconds, click feed. And when that is reliable and established, then we can add, okay, I will approach the mounting block, stand still, line up, click feed. Then again, approach the mounting block, stand still, line up, me mount up, click feed. That's my behavior chain. Obviously, it's been a bit simplified, every horse has his own pace, but that's kind of like a short summary of it. Okay. And the next one, I want to add this third point with kind of a disclaimer in the sense of those of us might not fully understand due to a lack of experience. No shame. This is still an area I myself find to be somewhat of uncharted territory. We might not understand what can be other motivators for our horses. Like, for example, my childhood pony Blondie hates scratches. She has no itchy spots, so scratches are actually punishing for her. Other horses really enjoy scratches, so behaviors can be maintained with other reinforcers like scratches. and the key here, if the horse finds scratches reinforcing enough to continue performing the behavior. Other examples of alternative reinforcers can be hand grazing, opening a stall door or gate, and we can see that with the dogs as well, allowing them to jump off the truck. That's the positive reinforcement there. The behavior of standing and waiting is rewarded by them being able to get off and run. Splashing in the water, getting to perform a behavior they really enjoy, getting to play with their favorite toys, grooming, exploring, smelling other horses' manure, or companionship.
I almost laughed out loud when you said getting to play with their favorite toy, because at the moment, one of our dogs, she's a border collie, so she really likes to work, and food isn't really motivating
She has
for her.
no food drive. Getting her to eat her regular food is a mission.
Just like her meals to live, for her to get nourishment, that is a mission.
While our rescue, on the other hand, his love language is food.
Yeah, he's really a big foodie. Actually, he's any foodie. He will eat anything.
He loves just hanging out in the kitchen while I cook and just hopes something falls on the ground that's edible.
But back to the border collie. We started rewarding her with a toy or a ball or a bouncy, chewy thing that she can chase and chew on after she ate. So now she eats much better after she knows that she's going to get her toy afterwards. So we actually reward her with another reinforcement.
With playtime.
Yes, with playtime for eating. So it's actually a quite opposite scenario, but it's our reality.
So back on topic, sorry, we went on a tangent.
Yes, we were a bit on a tangent, but why don't we exclusively use reinforcements then?
Do you mean these alternative reinforcers rather than food?
Yes.
Yeah. There are many nuances in regard to this, but it's largely because it's more precise and reliable to train with food. And I have found from my experiences that it often isn't motivating enough, especially to train new or more challenging behaviors. And that's just me. I mean, I know people who implement these beautifully. I hope to get to that point, but I'm not there yet. So I can't really speak on something I'm not completely 100% confident in.
I also feel that horses have two basic needs. If you put it down to basic needs.
To the bare bone.
Yes, it's socializing and food. If they have food and they are socializing, I feel that they feel that they have enough. We can't scratch the itch of socializing for horses, but we can provide them with food. So I think that's why it's easier to train with food.
Yeah, and I mean it's more precise. So I mean there's less room for,
Rewarding an unwanted behavior.
Yeah.
Or at an unwanted time.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's like uncharted territory for me still. So I can't say how to correctly implement it. If you want to learn more about it, I can suggest you to someone who has much more experience in that field. So if we stop reinforcing or stop using food for finished behaviors in air quotes, I say finished in quotation marks because behavior is never finished. You can always add more criteria. You can always add more duration. Behavior is never finished, and implying that it's finished means you no longer reinforce it. And so if we stop reinforcing a finished behavior, an extinction process will occur. Extinction learning refers to the gradual decrease in response to a conditioned stimulus that occurs when the stimulus is presented without reinforcement. It might not happen right away, but over time the horse will no longer have a motivation to perform the known behavior. I would like to highlight the comment from my Instagram. I really appreciate it when people comment and add their insight. This comment, I think, explains some important elements about how behavior is maintained and really drives the message home. I also understand why never, in air quotes, might be a turn-off initially. But once someone understands the learning science, never makes complete sense. As when using negative reinforcement, we never stop using negative reinforcement. So when using positive reinforcement, you never stop using positive reinforcement. The behaviors don't magically maintain themselves. There's always a motivation for them and something that is maintaining them. They will need to be reinforced at least periodically to be maintained, either with pressure release or positive reinforcement. The motivation can switch too. So you could have started off teaching it with positive reinforcement and then begun to maintain it with negative reinforcement, unintentionally or not. But the behavior just doesn't continue to happen for no reason. So technically, the answer never is accurate. Positive reinforcement can also be things like scratches, getting to leave the pasture, to graze, etc. So creating a larger pool of reinforcers to use is possible for maintaining a behavior you don't want to always use food for. But you still can never stop using positive reinforcement to maintain it unless you're switching over to negative reinforcement. So that's all. That's my spiel on, when can we stop using food? The short answer is not really. So at the end of the day, I think it comes down to it's not normalized. It sounds weird, just because positive reinforcement is new. And it goes against everything we've been taught. So of course it will sound ridiculous and absurd. But I'm hoping that in the future, and as more people try positive reinforcement and implement it into their regular riding or just handling their horses, of course, that this will not be a ridiculous statement and we would not need to have a whole conversation about the topic, because I've never heard anyone ask, well, when can I stop using pressure then? And that's not, to down talk anyone who uses pressure and release, but it's just, the principle of the thing. So that's it. That's it from me. That's it from the husband. The husband, do you want to say something before we go?
Hug your horses.
Hug your horses.
And your dogs.
And your dogs.
And your cats.
And your cats. And if you have hamsters or any other creature, and be kind to one another.